I became a housewife at my husband's request and was taken care of. However, after that, my husband became more and more violent, and I was oppressed every day. One day, my husband mistook me for someone else and strangled my sister who came to our house, causing a serious situation. My name is Eleanor. I am 31 years old and work as a housewife. My husband, Maverick, is the same age as me, and we have been married for 5 years since we fell in love at work. I worked even after getting married, but my husband was worried about my burden of doing both housework and work, so he recommended me to retire 2 years ago. At that time, my husband said to me,
"I want to have a child soon and I don't want to burden Eleanor with both housework and work."
With such hope from my husband, I became a housewife, but I still couldn't have a child even after 2 years. I suggested to my husband that I would like to have an examination at a hospital for conception, but he said,
"Why do I have to do that much? Isn't having a child a woman's responsibility? What did you retire for?"
"That's because I want to have a child soon."
First of all, you are a housewife, so work hard on housework and save money. That's where you should start.
After such a quarrel, my husband began to complain about housework and my attitude, and I was tired of married life. After retiring, I lost touch with my colleagues and friends, so the only way to relieve my stress was to call my parents and sister and complain to them. If I complain too much to my parents, they will worry, but if I talk to my sister, I feel better. My sister is married and has 2 children, but she and her husband work as police officers and both work. My sister also fights with her husband frequently over the division of housework and childcare, so she sympathizes with my complaints. When I consulted my sister about my situation, she recommended that I go back to work. When I contacted my previous workplace, they said they wanted me to come as a part-time worker, but when I consulted my husband, he opposed it.
Huh? What kind of work is it when you can't even do the housework properly? You can't do anything.
As expected, I gave up on getting a job because of my husband's reaction. However, a few days later, my husband said to me,
"I was asked by my workplace to quickly sign a part-time contract. Keep quiet about the fact that I opposed it."
He didn't want it to be known that he had opposed my employment. Thus, I was able to start working again, albeit on a reduced schedule. Despite being busy, doing a rewarding job made me feel brighter, and thanks to moving my body, I regained my appetite and was able to sleep soundly at night. One day, I was called into the HR department. I was told to take a break for a while, or to further reduce my hours and focus on my housework. I was upset by this incomprehensible talk. Apparently, my husband had complained that I was seducing male employees and using work as an excuse not to do housework, causing our home to be on the verge of collapse. For some reason, there were also a few secretly taken photos, and they seemed to be talking about scenes of mere conversation as if they were scenes of infidelity. There were even photos of our kitchen at home, showing laundry left dirty and dishes scattered around dirty. However, that was the scene in the kitchen when I was mentally exhausted. I insisted that this was a false accusation with no basis, but the person in charge of HR believed my husband, who was a full-time employee, more than me, a part-timer. Thus, I was forced to resign again. I asked my husband why he was obstructing me to this extent. To my indignation at being unjustly suspected, my husband said,
"Actually, there was a guy who was trying to have an affair with you. If that happened, you would definitely be sued by his wife. I was protecting you."
When I asked who it was, he said he couldn't reveal it due to the company's interpersonal relationships. I was disappointed to be forced into a dishonorable resignation, but I was happy that my husband wanted to protect me. Since I started working, our relationship as a couple had cooled down, and I thought it was good that I could know my husband's love again by returning home. However, my husband's kind attitude did not last. Before long, he started complaining about housework and how I spent the living expenses, just like before. I consulted with my husband about wanting to work again, but he strongly opposed it.
"That's enough! Your working is a nuisance to those around you. Or do you want to go manhunting?"
My husband shouted and kicked the chair and table. I hurriedly made an excuse. That's not true. I just wanted to go out into society.
"Don't talk back. I absolutely won't allow you to work. Come here. I'll do this.
My husband pulled my arm and tried to push me into the closet. I resisted desperately and pleaded with my husband. I understand. I'll quit working, so don't be violent.
Poof. It's good if you understand.
With that, my husband released me. Since then, my husband has tasted the thrill of intimidating me into obedience, and whenever something even slightly displeases him, he starts shouting and throwing things around. One day, I received a call from my sister asking if my job was going well. When I told her that I had resigned, she was surprised. When I explained the circumstances of my resignation, my sister was outraged.
What's that? It's more than a false accusation. Forcing someone to resign by framing them is usually a matter for a lawsuit.
My sister is a police officer, and I thought she would want to make things clear, so I said it was to avoid involving me in an office affair. He was worried about me.
Huh? No, that's strange. Weren't you made to believe that it happened when it didn't?
I don't know the truth because it's an internal issue.
Hey, wasn't the reason you became a full-time housewife to prepare for pregnancy? How's that going?
My sister's words made me realize. Indeed, that was the original purpose, but the current situation is far from being ready for pregnancy. Rather, I'm just shut in at home to please my husband. I listen to my husband's complaints, apologize, get yelled at, have furniture kicked, and apologize again. Can such a couple have a child? Can I get pregnant, give birth, and raise a child in this situation? I must be crazy not to have noticed until my sister pointed it out. Perhaps worried about my silence, my sister said,
I'll go this weekend.
A few days later, the day my sister was to visit arrived, but I had not yet told my husband about it. I was sure he would not be pleased, and he would probably pressure me to refuse my sister's visit. I didn't want my husband to take away the opportunity to talk to my sister at length, so I decided to keep my sister's visit a secret from my husband. That day, my husband seemed to have made plans to go fishing with his colleagues from work and left early in the morning, so I was relieved. My sister was due to arrive around noon, and with my husband gone, I thought we could talk at leisure. However, the weather forecast on TV was predicting heavy rain for the day, so I was worried about the weather. The sky, which had been cloudy in the morning, began to drizzle before noon, and soon it was pouring down. The intercom at my house rang, and when I went to greet the visitor, my sister was there, soaked from the rain. She had carelessly left without an umbrella. I couldn't leave my sister in her wet clothes, so I lent her some of my clothes to change into, and while she was relaxing in the living room, I put her clothes in the dryer to dry. Our dryer is located in the washroom near the bathroom, and it makes a lot of noise, so I can't hear the sounds in the other rooms while it's drying. That's why I didn't notice the sound of the front door opening. When I closed the door to the washroom, I heard a familiar voice in the living room and was surprised. It was my husband's shouting voice.
Don't just sit there leisurely for a wife. Stand up now.
I instinctively flinched at the sound, but my husband was not here. The shouting was coming from the living room on the other side. I hurried to the living room. My sister should be there. A shocking scene was unfolding in the living room. The figure from behind was my husband, who was strangling my sister from behind.
Hey, stand up and work. What are you doing just sitting there without even greeting your husband?
My sister remained silent, letting my husband do as he pleased. It seems that my husband mistook my sister, who had changed into my clothes, for me from behind. Her hair was wet from the rain, and she was wearing loose-fitting roomwear that made it difficult to discern her figure, so my husband, in a fit of anger, must have made a mistake. However, there was a decisive difference between my sister and me. My sister, being a police officer, was of course good at martial arts and was much taller than me. She was probably taller than my husband. I muttered involuntarily. "You," at the sound of my voice from behind, my husband turned around.
Huh? Why are you there?
My husband, surprised to see me, said that. Why? I was using the dryer. What are you doing to my sister? Then, my sister, while grabbing my husband's upper arm from behind and getting up, said in a low voice.
It seems that the master of this house has a habit of strangling his wife.
My husband tried to shake off her arm, but he seemed unable to move against my sister's vice-like grip. My husband said in a hurry.
It's a misunderstanding.
Do you know what happens to a person when they are strangled? They are deprived of breath, the circulation of blood to the head is cut off, and they die quickly. That's what you're doing to your wife, to my sister.
My sister's voice was a bit hoarse, probably because she had been strangled, but it was a low, husky voice. My husband began to make excuses in a hurry.
No, this is like a game, we always do it as a joke.
A game? A joke?
Yes. It's a game.
My sister turned around and met my gaze. I shook my head, gesturing that my husband was lying. Then, my sister nodded and said to my husband.
Even if it's a game, strangling is dangerous. I'll teach you how to protect your body, so I want you to learn it.
Huh? Protect? Huh?
Ignoring my husband's confused words, my sister moved her arm further back, grabbed my husband's shoulder firmly, and began to put strength into her whole body. My husband's feet were lifted off the ground, and he seemed to be panicking because he couldn't move anymore. My sister said to my husband in a brisk voice.
Now, curl up and get ready. I'm going to teach you what happens when you strangle someone from behind. Ready, go.
At my sister's shout, my husband screamed in reply.
No!
The next moment, my sister's shoulder throw was beautifully executed, and my husband's body, which had been thrown into the air, was slammed onto the living room table, and his scream echoed throughout the room.
Ouch!
The wooden tableboard cracked in two with a loud noise, and my husband lay gasping for breath on the broken table.
Ugh.
He was groaning, but judging from his complexion, he didn't seem to be seriously injured. At that time, several voices were heard from the entrance, and 3 people entered the house. They were my husband's colleagues who I knew, and they all had fishing rods. I asked, "What brings you all here?" According to them, they went fishing but decided to give up halfway due to the rain. My husband invited them to drink beer at home. However, my husband, who entered the house first, did not come back for a long time, and they heard screams and sounds of destruction. They were surprised and entered the house. All 3 of them were shocked to see the living room in a mess. My husband, thinking that his ally had arrived, groaned and said,
Help me! Call the police!
Upon hearing this, his colleagues looked at me and my sister with suspicion. However, my sister showed them her smartphone with all of my husband's words and actions recorded when he strangled her. When my sister was attacked by my husband, she calmly operated her smartphone and recorded the entire situation. His colleagues frowned at my husband's words coming from the smartphone and looked at him with contempt as he lay there. My husband, who managed to get up, reached out to grab the smartphone from my sister's hand and said,
Hey, give it to me! It's defamation. I'll sue you.
Of course, it should be easy for my sister to push away such a weak husband, but I stood in front of her and said, Defamation? Who are you to say that? You made up baseless rumors about me, such as adultery and neglecting household chores, and forced me to resign. You have no right to criticize my sister. Then, one of his colleagues, who was in charge of personnel, said,
I thought it was strange. The reason for your resignation at that time was his lie.
Upon hearing this, my husband said to the employee,
No, that was...
Apparently, he couldn't think of any more excuses, and he mumbled. Seeing that, the employee said,
If you're not injured, shall we talk outside for a bit? There are some things we need to report to our boss.
After being told that, my husband was taken out by his colleagues again. My sister and I, who were left in the living room, began to clean up the broken table. I said to my sister, Thank you. I've made up my mind now. My sister replied,
I didn't do anything. I broke the table, though.
It's really broken in half.
Oops. Should I compensate you?
I smiled at my sister and said, "It's okay. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to break the bond with that shitty man like this table." Hearing my words, my sister smiled and nodded. After that, I took refuge in my parents' house and decided to divorce my husband through a lawyer. The lawyer introduced to me by my sister's husband understood my situation well and demanded $17,000 as compensation for the defamation of me spreading baseless rumors to the company, and also agreed to pay half of my husband's salary during the period when I resigned as property division. Furthermore, the lawyer made the company admit my unfair dismissal and received payment of the basic salary until the end of the part-time contract period. Also, when my parents-in-law came to apologize at my parents' house, I heard that my husband tried to counterattack by saying that he was assaulted by my sister, but he was blamed by his parents-in-law and colleagues after watching the recorded video on the smartphone. It was said that he received a pay cut for making up bad rumors to denigrate his wife and involving personnel. I am currently receiving counseling at a support center for women who are victims of domestic violence and looking for a way to become independent. I think there were things I needed to reflect on, such as not being able to distinguish between domination and affection, and I intend to make sure I don't make any more mistakes in my life. How was this story? Please subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.